She's a professor, she's an instructor, she's so many wonderful things. For those of us that work in Vancouver, the Lower Mainland, she's a colleague and she's a friend. Tess is currently pursuing her PhD on inclusive library services, so it is an absolutely perfect fit today. And when I mentioned to Tess, or when I was talking to Tess about this institute and what we could do with it, and I had heard this name, Chris Cleaver, and I thought, what do you think about him? And Tess said, oh my gosh, are you serious? It's different because we come from the library world, but trying to understand the role that Chris plays in education and in inclusive education is absolutely huge. I'm hoping some of you had a chance to read some of his research or will afterwards, but he is a groundbreaking scholar and practitioner in the United States and North America. So we are so, so lucky to have Chris here with us today, all the way from Northern Iowa. So with that, I turn it over to our incredible speakers. Thank you guys for being here, and let's get started.
Okay, so screensaver. Notes. I think I was supposed to, no, not my notes. I need to ask Chris how he came to this. Okay, so we sort of wanted to have. Are you going to speak from here? Or are you going to speak from there?
Well, I was gonna.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was gonna. Yeah. I was going to stand.
Yeah, you stand. Okay, so what we wanted to do was, well, just first of all, is I wanted to. Well, first of all, one of the reasons I did a PhD, started a PhD, is because I started reading, I wanted to learn how to do it better, and so I started looking for research, and pretty quickly, this had been back in 2010, I found some work that, that Chris had written. So I really want to thank him for writing something that I could understand, and that's sort of what led me there. But my question, and Chris is going to talk to us for quite a while, and I just
It kept getting shorter.
Yeah, I know, and now it's even shorter, so you're going to have to talk really fast. So we're going to kind of ask each other like how you came to this focus and what drew you to this line of inquiry. So I want to ask Chris in front of you, like, why did you do this kind of work? And then you can tell us that quickly, and then you can tell us all that you want to tell us.
All right. Should I stand now?
Go for it.
Oh, sure.
You're on. You're on.
Sure.
The floor is yours.
All right.
The floor is yours.
How did I get started in this? I forgot about this part.
Yeah, I know. That's
No, sure,
I'm putting you on the spot.
my entry into, so I think a lot about disability issues. And my entry into that is kind of unique. It was a court sentence for a little transgression I had in high school. And so it sort of, I guess, introduces the whole thing that we'll be talking about today on how our society thinks about a disability. And when I say our society, I usually am speaking in the US, but I have a lot of friends up in Canada so I know we share a lot of similarities in our ideas and so forth. So yeah, I was sentenced to community service, and that's how I entered into this field. I had to do work at what I would call a mini institution now. Back then, we referred to it as community living facility. And through that, I began to work with kids. And I was all into traditional special ed at the time. I didn't know anything different. And it was highly segregated, very separate. And that's all I understood until I began to explore a bit more and came into the idea of inclusive education and ultimately literacy for every child.
Perfect.
Shall I roll?
Launch.
All right, well, on that note, this is my friend Megan, and she's with Yvette Edmister, a wonderful communication disorders researcher. Megan, I met when she was 5 years old, and her story is similar to a lot of kids' stories in my life. She was born with obvious disabilities, physical disabilities. Her single mom, was told in the hospital very, very soon after Megan's birth, listen, your child has these significant physical disabilities, cerebral palsy, and she won't probably speak. She won't probably walk, so all this soon after her birth. Oh, and she's also going to be severely intellectually disabled. So that's what Megan's mom initially heard, And in Iowa and a lot of states, I'm not sure how Canada works this, but when you're born with apparent disabilities, the special education services start very early on, and so people would come into the home, their home delivered services. And so generally speaking, they sort of twisted and turned her body this way and that way. They were very focused on her physical needs for obvious reasons. Then she was just beginning to turn 3. It was time to send her to preschool. She went to a special education preschool just for kids with disabilities. And I actually went and visited that preschool. She had left by the time I met her, but I went back to get information about Megan. And at that preschool, it doesn't look like the kind of preschool most of us might have experienced or our children experienced. It didn't have that block area, the wooden blocks. It didn't have the big circle rug there. It didn't have easels. It didn't have an art center. It didn't have a book nook or whatever you want to call that library that preschools have so kids can go access books on their own initiative. It didn't, in fact, have a lot of reading as part of the preschool. The teacher would read often the same book over and over, which isn't a bad practice unless you do it all the time to the kids. But that was, you know, hit or miss over the course of a week if she would get out a book or not. So it didn't look like all that stuff that we tend to associate with young children in schooling. At age 5, she left. Oh, and I should mention in her paperwork, Megan was described as intellectually disabled, severely so. She was also described as a behavior problem, which is rather shocking. She had no attention span. I think that phrase was actually in part of the paperwork. She could focus, it was said, for 30 seconds, but it required a sticker system. I don't know how you fit a sticker system into 30 seconds, but you know, they did. And so all of this came with her when she transitioned into the regular public school, but a special ed section of that, where she was, as a 5-year-old, kindergarten age, she was put into a unit sort of for kids with more significant disabilities that included 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, sort of our primary grades, all right? So that was Megan, and I got to know her. We had a project going on literacy for every student, for every child, that was funded by the Iowa Department of Education. So that's when I got to know her. Her teachers had self-selected themselves into this program. So anyway, trying to understand Megan's early experiences in school, that looked so different from the experiences. I have 2 boys, from the experiences my boys had when they went off to preschool. One way of looking at this is that we have this cultural boundary of expectations and performance patterns, and we don't even know it. I mean, it exists in this room. You know, when I got here, I came and I put my stuff up front because, you know, I'm talking to you guys today. You guys arrived and you spread out, and there were some rules as to how you were, and you followed those rules, you know. What would we have done if one of you had sat up here with us? It would have destroyed, you know, nothing would have been ruined by that. This would have proceeded just fine, but we all would have been like, you know, who's that? What's she doing? Right? You know, so we have these expectations. And libraries have them, classrooms have them. Let me go forward here. This cultural boundary, it surrounds the way, and I just, you know, this is obviously very simple here, but it surrounds the way we're supposed to talk, we're supposed to move, it surrounds the way we're supposed to socialize and express ourselves, right? And so if you think to your library, well, what are those expectations that we have there? You know, one of the issues, though, is that some kids, some adults, I'll stick with kids for now, some kids don't do these things in the ways we expect, in the ways that we've come to know as the correct ways. Some kids don't talk, like Megan, for instance. She does, but it's very minimal, and it's very difficult to understand. Sorry about this, girl. I set that down for... some kids don't move the way we expect. Some kids roll rather than walk, right? Some kids walk awkwardly. Some kids don't socialize or express themselves in the ways we expect. And Megan was one of those kids. A gap formed between who she was and how we've laid out our expectations for what is normal, right? That gap is a disconnection then between the child and those things that we expect. And if you have that disconnection for particular reasons, the reasons that matter, then you land in this disability world, all right? We can have these differences for a variety of reasons. So if you don't talk the way we expect, perhaps, you know, in the US, English isn't your first language. And, you know, we would hope that we approach that struggle, if we want to call it that, from a perspective that, well, English isn't the first language, therefore they're struggling a little bit with English in the classroom. However, what's kind of intriguing is at least in the US, a huge chunk of kids whose first language is not English actually do end up in our special education system. On what basis? Well, we can only imagine, right? So anyway, only certain differences get smushed together as disability, physical disability, intellectual disability, autism, or whatever categories we want to talk about. And for Megan, why did she go to a setting that didn't offer the kinds of things we associate with a rich early childhood experience? Why were her opportunities and possibilities so limited in the minds of people around her? Well, the issue is that Megan found herself in this dominant perspective of kids who have a gap between who they are and what's expected. And this dominant perspective is focused all around the idea of deficit. And that's how our society has approached these differences that matter. We equate them to deficiency. I'll get to that in a second. One of the issues here is that we think, because most kids do talk in a particular way, and again, this is simplified, because if you think about it, you know, how you talk on the playground is different than how you talk in reading time in school, is different than how you talk in PE class or gym class. You know, so we talk in different ways, but we come to do it in the way expected in that micro context, right? Most kids do that. They conform. You know, they find their way into these expectations. And we come to think that, well, those expectations must be natural. You know, they either arose from our evolutionary past or perhaps God put them down. But because most of us do that, you know, we know that that's the way we're supposed to be. They're considered natural. They're considered just objective truths out there. And if you don't do things the right way, then something objectively is wrong with you. The laws that govern our societies, our cultures, our schools, our libraries, you know, you're breaking those truths when you fall on the wrong side of the gap. And we interpret that then as a deficiency in the individual. And what do we do about that deficiency? We tend to put you somewhere else, with the idea that in that somewhere else we have all these really specialized people who can come and teach you the ropes of being in these valued locations. We'll teach you the right way to talk, the right way to walk, the right way to socialize. And when you've achieved that good enough, well, we might let you in then. Prove yourself first, and then we'll let you in. So that's why Megan ended up initially in that strange preschool that didn't look like what you and I think of as a preschool. And that's why she ended up in that special ed wing of her public school when she first started there. So we come along. What is 40 minutes? I didn't still look at when we started.
You're supposed to talk until 9:50, but we started a little late, so 9:55.
9:55, okay. So when we came along, our idea was, well, first of all, we had to recreate, we thought we had to can you all hear me if I don't stand right there? Okay. We thought we had to recreate all of that stuff that Megan missed out when she missed out on the stuff of preschool. Because you know what, all of that stuff I listed, and just off the top of my head, that block area, the circle time stuff that we do in preschool, the pretend play, the dramatic play, you know what, all that stuff is actually literacy. It's the construction of narratives by kids. And that is the origins of how we become the literate beings we become, and she had none of that. Right? And so when she's illiterate a little bit later on, well, we shrug our shoulders and we say, well, geez, she's really disabled. But what kind of opportunities has she had up until then? So we wanted to give her that sort of empowering stuff that kids in good preschools come out with, this enculturation into, hey, I'm smart, hey, I am a reader, even though, you know, it might not look like the way you and I read, but they have that sense about themselves. So, for instance, this was actually the first ever moment that Megan was allowed to, just on her own terms, grasp letters and play with them. And we see 3- and 4-year-olds already doing this. You know, they sit down in the art area or at home and they draw a picture, and that picture is really a story. There's always a story with that picture. A lot of times they tell us the story, sometimes they don't, but there's always a story there. And at the age of 3 or 4, we begin to see these squiggles enter into those stories that they're telling through pictures. And those squiggles are the origins of us the origins of text being put into the stories. You know, they don't look like the letters you and I use necessarily, but that's where it all begins. And she had never, and that's under their control. They're in charge of that stuff, right? So Megan had never had that. She had some difficulties with moving her body in a way that would easily allow her to just sit down in an art center and do that. So we used an alternate pencil, and this is the first time she ever had just control over letters.
Should I show you how it works? You all right? All right. How it will work is, I will show you the letters. When I touch the one you want, you let me know. And then I'm going to write it down here. Before I begin, what kind of marker should we use? I've got a really cool blue one.
So just try to put her in charge, and these sort of little things that most of us just do. Most of us just grab the marker we like.
It's been popular.
Have not been a part of her life. Even the yes/no was questionable in the minds of people around her.
It's been well loved. I'll be able to write some letters.
So a very low-tech adaptation here.
What I need and what we'll need to try to figure out is how you want to let me know which letter to write. Now, I saw that sometimes you're shaking your head yes, and sometimes no. Should we give that a try? Okay. So, if I say, would you like A? You could tell me yes or no. And should I write A? Okay. I'll write an A. A. You tell me again, it wasn't clear if that was a yes or no. Yeah. A? Yep. Okay, I'll write it again. A.
That's a lot of A's you're lining up there. I was getting bored.
You just tell me no, and I'll go to the next letter. A. No. B.
Ah, good. All right, so I think the camera guy needs to stay quiet. But I actually, to be serious, I wasn't sure that, she had never really been given an opportunity, right, to be in charge. So I was starting to wonder if she, dared say no, so I'm like, maybe we could try to move this ahead. But the point was to just give her total control. We could have been good teachers, and believe me, we went there quickly. We could have said, all right, Megan, let's pick out the letters of your name. We could have done that, and we did move there pretty quickly, but what we thought we were going to be doing was recreating that emergent literacy period that she had missed out on. You know, we wanted to go there and just give her opportunities to play and to think about herself.